think we got a critical mass here. Well, thank you all for coming. We are here today to announce the introduction of the Don't Steal Act. The Don't Steal Act is an example of how I am working to bring Rhode Island values to Washington. I want to thank, and I'm going to introduce them all individually in a moment, but thank our Attorney General, Peter Nerona, for being here and his leadership. We have many partners from organized labor today, including some we will hear from, but I particularly want to recognize George Nee from the AFL CIO, Greg Mancini from BuildRI, among others. And I want to thank all of you for being here. Americans who work hard and do the right thing are entitled to a fair day's pay. But unfortunately, all across the country and even here in Rhode Island, workers are cheated out of the pay that they have earned. And that can look like a lot of different things. It can look like employers stealing tips that are legally supposed to go to the employees. It can look like employers not paying the minimum wage or not paying the wage that was promised or contracted to employees. It can look like bad actors taking kickbacks from employees in exchange for employment. And unfortunately, this happens all over Rhode Island and all over the country. It is estimated that more than $50 billion are stolen from workers by their employers every year in this country. Imagine that you are a painter or a roofer making $12 or $13 an hour under the hot sun every day, and your employer fails to pay you the wage that you are owed, doesn't give you overtime, requires you to work without pay, intimidates you if you don't do what they want you to do. This happens all the time, and we need to get tough about it. I am very grateful to come from Rhode Island, where we have leaders like the leaders who are here with me today who have done something about it here in the Ocean State. I think you all know that recently in Rhode Island, with the leadership of the Attorney General, the General Assembly, and our leaders in organized labor, we passed a tough bill in Rhode Island to increase penalties for wage theft. And I want to thank everyone who is here for being a part of making that happen. But we have to do this at the national level because we know that criminality, particularly when it comes to taking advantage of workers, does not always recognize state boundaries. And we'll hear from the Attorney General, but I know that it makes a prosecutor's job easier when there are a range of different venues and different courts that a case can be brought to. We've seen this even here in Rhode Island, where recently Rhode Island workers had their wages stolen by a Massachusetts company, a construction company that had a manager who was basically telling the workers, if you want your job, then you got to give 10% back to me. That's the kind of thing that happens all the time that we need to crack down on. And why does this happen? It happens because these bad actors think they can get away with it. They know they can get away with it. And oftentimes, even if they get caught outside of Rhode Island, all they get is a slap on the wrist. There's a fundamental unfairness when if you go and you steal a TV from the store, you are going to jail, but if you steal money out of a worker's pocket, you get a slap on the wrist. And that is the case in too many jurisdictions in this country, and it's the case, unfortunately, under federal law. So the bill that I'm introducing in Congress when we get back in September is based on the bill that was passed at the state level here in Rhode Island. And what it aims to do is bring wage theft up to parity with other forms of theft. So if you steal money out of a worker's pocket, that will be taken just as seriously and be met with just as tough of a penalty as if you commit other types of theft or other types of fraud. So just so you all know, under current law, under current federal law, an employer who steals wages can be fined no more than $10,000, no matter how much they steal. A $10,000 fine, no matter how much they steal, and there is no federal provision for jail time, no matter how much is stolen from workers. There is jail time and there are higher fines for other forms of theft, if you steal money from the bank or you steal something from the store, but not for stealing money out of a worker's pocket. So our goal is to correct that fundamental unfairness and to build on the great work that was done here in the state level, where with the leadership of the Attorney General, the General Assembly, the Governor, we have actually done the right thing at the state level here in Rhode Island. So I'm going to turn it over to the Attorney General in just a moment, but I want to thank all of you for being here. I'm excited to introduce this bill. This is one of those, I can't believe that it hadn't been introduced in Congress already. But even though we haven't filed it yet, we're going to introduce it when we get back in September. We already have 20 co-sponsors lined up. We already have more than a dozen endorsing organizations at the national level and another 15 endorsing organizations here in Rhode Island. So I anticipate that we will have a lot of momentum and a lot of support right out of the gate when we introduce this bill in September. But I want to turn it over now to somebody who is a real leader in this space, who made this a priority for him and his office to pass a tough wage theft bill at the state level, and who has been prosecuting these cases already with these authorities. So thank you very much, Peter Nerona, for your leadership. Please come on up. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. And I want to echo what you just said. I mean, your leadership here on this issue is needed, and I'm really grateful for it. You know, when I think about wage theft, the first thing I think to talk about is the nature and the scope of the problem. And that problem can lie just beneath the surface of the everyday consciousness of Rhode Islanders and Americans all across this country. Why? Because the victims of wage theft tend to be workers with the least amount of voice. They are often people who are in the country and are undocumented. If they are in the country lawfully, they're American citizens. They many times do not speak English, and so their ability to assert their rights are more limited. Organized crime, organizations in Rhode Island, throughout Rhode Island, have done a really good job of bringing this to the attention of Rhode Islanders. But the fact remains is that this activity continues here. And I can give you just two significant examples. One is the building of the Barrington Middle School, where workers were exploited, they weren't paid their wages, and frankly, there was very little that we could do about it because the parties involved left the state. We couldn't bring them back to Rhode Island, we couldn't extradite them under the previous state of the law that my friends in labor helped us change. And so those workers were cheated out of their wages were stolen, they had no recourse at all, and the reason they're not standing here with us today is because by the time that law enforcement was alerted to the fact of the wage theft, they were long gone from Rhode Island. Like many workers, they tend to move around this country. The other one that I want to bring to everyone's attention and remind everyone about is the project at the Woonsocket Rise Academy, where over $150,000 in wages were stolen from more than a dozen workers. That is the nature and the scope of the problem. And so while we have taken steps to fix it here, again, with my friends in labor behind us and alongside us, there is much more work to do. Even in Rhode Island, it was a long, difficult fight. Right, everybody? A long and difficult fight to make the steps that we made. There are some afternoons, George, you and I will never get back from negotiating the bill 2 or 3 years ago. But even there, it applies only to the construction industry, and we know that wage theft exists well beyond that. So this is why the Congressman's bill is so important. Number one, it will expand the scope of illegal conduct that is reachable on the federal level, including here in Rhode Island. So that's number one. Number two, it will allow the United States Attorney's Office here and around the country to bring these prosecutions. They are the enforcers of federal law. And I will tell you that having been the United States Attorney here in Rhode Island and having been an assistant U.S. Attorney, that there is no U.S. Attorney anywhere that will chase a fine. There is no U.S. Attorney anywhere that will chase a misdemeanor. We never did one in the 15 years I was in that office. Not a single misdemeanor. Not a misdemeanor drug case, not a misdemeanor theft case, nothing. We never did a misdemeanor case. So the fact that the congressman's well thought out legislation would make this crime a felony beyond a certain level of theft is critically important, and it puts these crimes, the prosecution of these crimes, in the hands of United States Attorney's offices that have the resources and the ability to do them incredibly well. And so there is an opportunity here for the Congress to do what is right by Americans. Again, I want to thank the Congressman for his leadership. It's not surprising at all, given our past work together. I'm grateful for it, and anything that I can do to help it succeed, you know I'm here to help. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, General. Next, I do want to hear some of our partners in organized labor. The labor movement is so important, and this is a great example of how organized labor not only protects and supports union members, but also those workers who are not in unions by ensuring that there is a level playing field and strong protections across the board. So I want to start by introducing someone who, again, was a real leader on getting this done at the state level in Rhode Island, and has been a great advisor and partner as we've worked on this bill at the federal level, President of the Rhode Island AFL CIO, George Nee.
Thank you, Congressman. On behalf of the Rhode Island AFL-CIO, I want to have a special thanks to the Congressman for listening to this issue when it was brought up at a community forum. And when we talked about it, we were both surprised to find out that in the history of Congress, at least for the records that they could look at, no one has ever brought that issue up before, which was surprising and sort of discouraging. The Congressman, to his credit, immediately said, if no one else has ever put that in, I'm putting it in. And we're going to make this a national level based on the success that we had in Rhode Island. Also, special thanks to our Attorney General. As he mentioned, this was a long, difficult struggle. This went on for at least 4 or 5 years where this was a priority of the labor movement. And we were just heartened when Peter Nerona, as the Attorney General, said, I'm going to make this a priority of the Attorney General's office. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean just words. It meant that he went and testified in three years in a row to try to get this legislation passed. It meant that he sat in a lot of sessions with the business community and the leadership in the House to make it happen. And that's what it takes when someone says it's a priority. We were thrilled that this legislation is now the law in Rhode Island for several of the reasons that the Attorney General gave. And I think that's important to look at this from a very interesting perspective. Yes, this is pro-labor, it's pro-worker, and it should be. And for all the reasons that we mentioned, workers' rights should be protected, their paychecks should be protected, and their dignity should be protected, because when you're stolen from, you're a victim, you're violated. And then when you can't do anything about it, it compounds the issue. But it's also pro-business. The overwhelming majority of businesses play by the rules. And when this happens, and unscrupulous and immoral and illegal companies operate this way, they hurt other businesses. The guys that are playing by the rules, that are paying their taxes, that are paying the workers, that are playing in a way that benefits everybody, and they're being taken advantage of as much as the worker is being taken advantage of. And also, we have to look at this as a pro-taxpayer bill. When you cheat the workers, you're cheating the taxpayer. You're cheating the unemployment system. You're cheating the workers' compensation system. You're cheating the TDI, TCI system. You're cheating everybody. So you're cheating that worker. That worker then goes and finds out later, oh, I didn't have that money paid, so I have less Social Security when I retire. So this is, if we look at it in that totality, what better bill to have before our Congress when it's pro-business, pro-worker, and pro-taxpayer. And in January, with our new administration, under the Harris-Walz administration with a Congress controlled by the Democrats, the Congress continued to be controlled, the Senate controlled by the Democrats, this is going to become the law of the land. So again, thank you all for being here, and thank you, Congressman, for making this happen.
Thank you, George. As the Attorney General said, wage theft, it exists in all different industries. And even, here locally, we've seen examples of it in the food service industry and hospitality, domestic employees, domestic workers. But, the industry where it is perhaps most prevalent is in the construction industry and in the trades. So we are joined here by representatives from a number of trades unions, and I want to invite up to speak on behalf of them from the Painters and Allied Trades, Justin Kelley. Justin.
Yeah, appreciate you. Good morning, everybody. Like the Congressman said, my name is Justin Kelley with the Painters and Allied Trades, but I'm very proud to represent the 10,000 members of the Rhode Island Building and Construction Trades Council here today. And I would say the millions of working families across this country that have to deal with an unrestricted crime wave that is wage theft. We deal with day in, day out the effects on the construction industry of unscrupulous employers who decide it's within their right to take from the workers who did the work on their projects their wages. I go back and I'm a student in history, so I remember a song by Woody Guthrie. Some folks will rob you with a 6-gun, some will rob you with a fountain pen. And God, isn't it unconscionable that in 2024, this is still going on to the level it is here in the state of Rhode Island and across this country. And so kudos to Congressman Mancini in taking the step to introduce this legislation. And we're confident that the Congress will pass this in next session because, like Attorney General Rhode said, this affects the most vulnerable amongst us. Yes, immigrant workers, but many, many native-born workers as well. People who have any sort of vulnerability. When an unscrupulous employer or contractor of the construction industry think that they can get over on them, they do. And so many don't have any sort of recourse or don't know what their rights are around their recourse. And we've done a lot of work to try to change that, including the state level legislation that was passed. And that's good, it's a good tool, but sad to say it's still going on. Just the other day I had a man in my office who was unfamiliar with the reasons why he had to pay taxes when he went to work. Was unfamiliar with the fact that he was actually being taken advantage of by drywall contractors from the state of New Hampshire that were working here in mills being renovated in the city of Providence, Pawtucket, and Central Falls. Just the other day, the Department of Labor and Training was able to bring fines with a settlement agreement against a Massachusetts-based roofing company working on schools in Pawtucket. They're in the process of settling with a contractor working at the corner down in Providence behind Adler's Hardware, a project receiving taxpayers' money, where wage theft is going on from a contractor who was fined 4 times in 2018 for the same issues, doing drywall work. So this is an ongoing issue. It hurts honest business people. It drags down conditions in the industry. It creates a situation where taxpayers, not only are we deprived of the taxes that should go into the state coffers and federal coffers to take care of things like roads and bridges, it also forces those of us who do our fair share and pay our taxes to have a higher tax burden, because scofflaws who are unpunished continue with this illegal behavior and activity. So let's get serious. Let's put a stop to this crime wave. Let's stop wage theft. Let's make sure that we support Congressman Mancini, the Harris-Walz incoming administration. Make sure that there are people who are going to treat working people's issues seriously in Congress and the federal government and get this Don't Steal Act passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Appreciate it. Finally, and George mentioned this earlier, when people have their wages stolen, it's not just the workers who get hurt. It's also the public that loses out on tax revenue, and it's the employers who are doing the right thing that are hurt. because we want to have a level playing field. And when you have some employers who are cutting corners and stealing wages, they are underbidding those employers who are doing the right thing. And so BuildRI is an absolutely indispensable organization in Rhode Island that brings together labor organizations and responsible employers that do the right thing and that pay their workers fairly. And I'd like to invite up Greg Mancini to talk a little bit from the employer's perspective about why we need to crack down on wage theft. Greg.
Thank you, Congressman Magazzina. One of the things about going last is a lot has been said, and I really don't want to repeat much of what's been said, but I do want to thank you for your efforts in this matter. I do want to also thank labor, although I consider myself half labor, because my board's half labor, for all their efforts to date in passing comprehensive legislation at the State House, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, and certainly the Attorney General, who I've never seen a public official had such great command of subject matter than the Attorney General in dealing with wage theft and making wage theft and misclassification a felony in the state of Rhode Island, the first, by the way, in the country. As was indicated before, $50 billion have been lost to income across this country to wage theft to workers. Several years ago, the General Assembly, actually 2009, the General Assembly took an analysis of how much money the state of Rhode Island loses. In the state of Rhode Island, they determined the state of Rhode Island loses almost $50 million a year in uncollected income tax, unemployment insurance, temporary disability, and workers' compensation premiums. And as a result of that study, myself, George, fellow attorney Richard Sinapia of Sinapia Law Associates comprehensively rewrote our wage and hour laws to increase penalties and make misclassification a wage violation, a civil violation at the time. And that passed in 2012. However, from what we've seen in the construction industry, as well as every other industry, it's not enough. Wage theft is insidious and pervasive. As a consequence, we teamed up with the Attorney General and made wage theft a felony. And as I indicated just now, it's the first time it's occurred in the country. As a representative of 4 different contractor associations, it's essential that there's enough deterrence, because our contractors want to compete on a level playing field. And we can't have a level playing field when there's not deterrence. So we think this is a great step. We think that federal legislation is needed to supplement what the tools that the Attorney General have, and we think this legislation is essential to a level playing field to law-abiding businesses in the state of Rhode Island. So thank you, Representative Magazine.
Thank you, Greg. We're happy to take questions if there are any. Pat.
Attorney General Nerona, a quick two-parter. Number one, can you describe to us the logistics of the prosecution as it would take place between, say, the federal attorney and your office? And B, is there any mechanism in place or about to come into place where contractors' licenses or the ability to bid on certain jobs would be impacted by a successful prosecution against those individuals, those firms? I think we're all aware of the shuffle that goes on with corporations and shell corporations with some of these folks.
Yeah, well, to the first, we go through that process of deciding where a case should be prosecuted between state and federal authorities all the time. I've been on both sides of that equation, as most of you know. It happens in the context of organized crime cases, drug cases, firearms cases, and that would be the same here, which would be, and what I really love about the way the federal system works is that the amount stolen translates into the potential size of the jail sentence. One of the challenges, frankly, we've had on the state side is getting judges to look at these cases as seriously as I think they should. I hope that changes with the new law, but the federal system is much more structured. The design is to be more equitable across the country. And so I think the prospects of a really impactful prosecution would go up with this legislation. In terms of, I think what you're getting at, Pat, when you're talking about a conviction is whether or not a company could be debarred from bidding on public contracts because of a felony conviction. And I think that's likely, and I think that would be a deterrent as well, frankly.
Thank you.
With regard to your proposed law, would any of this make it possible for the country to go over, the U.S. Attorney's Office to go after anyone retroactively for fines?
Yeah, that's a good question. So basically, we've modeled this after the penalties for financial fraud, because there's like a pretty robust federal statute for financial crimes. And so I'd have to go back and look, but I would assume that whatever the statute of limitations is for financial fraud, for financial theft, would be the same here. But we can get back to you on that.
And it's also difficult, if not impossible, and I would say it's impossible to charge someone with a crime that wasn't a crime at the time the conduct took place.
Yeah.
So there are differences between procedural and substantive due process, for example, but you would not be able to look back in time. It would be my off-the-cuff, granted a long cuff, assessment.
Trust what he says on this. Steve?
Would the federal legislation be different from the Rhode Island legislation and being other industries as well, or will it just be in the
Yes.
construction industry?
No, this would apply to all industries.
And then that
any
would
all.
also apply to Rhode Island then,
Correct.
so restaurants would be included under federal.
Restaurants, again, like we had a high-profile case several years ago with a domestic employee at the Naval War College, so all of that would be covered.
Congressman, what do you see as the potential for the same level of investigation and prosecution in white-collar environments? Wage theft is prominent and significant in tech firms. Again, you have these companies going in and out of business almost daily.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what we're trying to do too is just raise awareness, right? Like, it's not just about changing the law and stiffening the penalties. It's also about sending a message to U.S. attorneys, to the Department of Justice, whatever administration is in office, that we expect them to take this just as seriously as they take other forms of theft.
And what committee do you expect this to go through, and have you been able to develop any sort of bipartisan support for this?
Yeah, so we're just getting started in the process. We haven't actually introduced the bill yet. We're going to introduce it when we get back into session in September, and I will be shopping it around to both sides of the aisle. I assume it will be referred to the Judiciary Committee. That's the committee that typically deals with criminal statutes, but we won't, I mean, the parliamentarian will make that decision once we get back and actually introduce the bill.
Thank you.
So multiple speakers have alluded to the fight to get the similar bill passed through the State House. What sort of lessons are you taking from that to try to get it passed federally?
Well, look, I think one of the points of opposition, which my friends in labor know, and I know the congressman is focused on, and is very explicit in his bill, is the mens rea, or the level of intent that one needs to be prosecuted for this crime. And so the bill reads willfully, which is exactly the right phrase to use. There was a lot of pushback about how my office would prosecute innocent mistakes. There's no criminal statute anywhere that prosecutes innocent mistakes. I think there's also the additional comfort for those who worry that, again, having been a U.S. attorneys are quite cautious in the prosecutions they bring. And so, but I think there will be this pushback that somehow the innocent mistake could be prosecuted by an overzealous prosecutors. I think U.S. attorneys' offices in particular are very careful prosecutors, particularly in the financial fraud setting. And so that shouldn't be a big concern. But I expect that there'd be some pushback on that, because that's where we saw most of it. I think George and Justin and others, you would agree, that's where we saw most of it.
Yeah, that's a really important point. So yeah, under the bill, you know, if an HR administrator accidentally hits the wrong button when they're running payroll, that would not be a criminal act under this bill, right? It has to be intent. They have to demonstrate that there was an intentional effort to withhold people's fair pay. You know, what I would say is, like, I was not in the State House when this bill was passed, but I, you know, had a sort of a front row seat to it. Is like, it takes some time and it takes some education, right? You know, passing a big bill like this, you know, doesn't happen right away. It takes some time. It takes some education. You know, I think you have, you know, people who will be concerned about the impact on businesses, and the answer there is, if you are a business that is doing the right thing, you will be helped by this level playing field. And because you have to have a demonstrated intent to be taking someone's wages, you will not be prosecuted for an innocent mistake. And so we'll have to educate people about that. And then, you know, on the other end of the spectrum, you know, there are people who are very interested in criminal justice reform and get nervous anytime you're looking to increase a penalty for anything. And so again, we'll have to just educate people that this is about a level playing field. Like, we are just saying that this form of theft should have the same penalty as any other form of theft under federal law, but it's going to take some education, and, you know, we're committed to doing that. All right, well, I want to thank you all for coming out. Thank you for helping us spread the word. I'm excited to introduce this bill, and I'm very excited to come from a state where we have so many great leaders and partners who stand up for working people, including our Attorney General, including our partners in organized labor here, BuildRI, and all of the other responsible employers who are out there doing the right thing. Thank you all for your leadership and your partnership, and let's get to work.
Thank you.